Hello and welcome to the SMARTIE Goal Fundamentals webinar for Children's Integrated Services professionals. The focus of today will be on applying the SMARTIE Goals concepts when writing outcomes with clients and families in the context of Children's Integrated Services. SMARTIE is an acronym, so each letter stands for a concept. S is for specific, M is for measurable, A is for achievable, R is for relevant or routines-based, T is for timely, I is for inclusive, and E is for equitable. We'll hear more about that in a bit. My name is Julia Wayne, and I use she/her pronouns, and I am the Personnel Development Coordinator for Children's Integrated Services, and I also work at UVM's Center on Disability and Community Inclusion. And I'm joined today by my colleagues, Lori Meyer, Associate Professor for UVM's College of Education and Social Services, and Ann Dillenbeck, who is the CIS Program Improvement Manager for Children's Integrated Services at the state of Vermont. So I'm going to give you an overview of the agenda for today's webinar. First, we will discuss the purpose of outcomes or goals. Why are we writing them in Children's Integrated Services? We will review the CIS 1 Plan Outcomes form, and we will discuss that there may be equivalents being used across the state as well. We will talk about an overview of the SMARTIE concepts themselves and provide examples along the way. We'll also have some reflection around the I and the E of SMARTIE, which are inclusive and equitable.
We have 3 learning objectives for our webinar today. The learning objectives point to what we'd like participants to learn before the end of the webinar, what you will be able to have in mind after the webinar. Participants will be able to name 2 benefits of setting goals. These benefits are true for us in our everyday lives as well as in CIS and the goals that we generate with clients and families. The second is to define the concepts behind the acronym SMARTIE. Julia already went through the letters and the words that they stand for, and Lori will give more of an explanation of each concept associated with the letters. And the third is to give 3 diverse examples of CIS 1 Plan or equivalent goals. We were purposeful in this webinar to give examples from different sets of services within CIS as well as shared goals. So when we say diverse examples, that's what we're talking about, examples that might reflect types of goals that clients or families receiving the different sets of services might identify.
So why SMARTIE goals? Well, first we want to offer a framework. So developing SMART goals has actually been part of the guidance for best practice in many fields since the 1980s, started by a man named George Duran of Spokane, Washington, who first published a paper on writing SMART goals in 1981. And it was his attempt to help organize a water power company's management efforts to improve their business success. And he wanted to provide a few easy-to-recall concepts so that managers could take their vague aspirations and turn them into concrete action plans. So we also see that developing SMART goals for clients and families has been part of CIS since the beginning. It has been a requirement of CIS since the beginning. And it has been updated to include the I and the E of the SMARTIE acronym in 2022. And we see that in our bundled contract, there is a requirement that 1 plans shall be developed in partnership between the CIS service providers and clients, with planned goals created that are both SMARTIE and meaningful to the pregnant person, family, and or early childhood education program.
Now that we've talked about the benefits of SMARTIE goals, let's highlight who receives those benefits. CIS serves a broad population, one that includes pregnant people and people right after the birth of a child or the addition of a child to a family, one that includes children ages birth through 5 and through age 12 for specialized childcare. And the third group is early childhood education and after-school programs. That's one of the reasons we say CIS families and clients rather than children when we refer to whom we serve. In addition to benefiting CIS clients and families, SMARTIE Goals also benefit all one plan or equivalent team members. SMARTIE Goals help team members focus, be family or client-centered, and track and celebrate the progress as they collaborate. The topics of SMARTIE Goals. In CIS, the topics have a broad range, and so here's an opportunity for us, or for you, to pause this webinar and think a little bit about your own experience. What topics have been identified by CIS providers and families or clients partnering in your region? We also put together a collage showing a variety of topics. So I'm looking at a collage of photographs that include a man with a pile of books. Perhaps that SMARTIE goal had to do with pursuing education and finding an early childhood education program for his children to attend so that he could enroll in classes. Another topic area might be feeding, whether it's chest feeding or using a bottle. So I'm looking at a picture of, in this case, it's a woman with a baby and a bottle, as well as nutrition as children grow and develop. Another picture shows a cutout of a apartment building or house, and sometimes SMARTIE goals in CIS address stable and safe housing, or they may address aspects of getting to that goal, as finding housing can sometimes take quite a while and involve a lot of stages. Another picture in the collage is a woman helping, looks like an infant, learn to walk. So that learning to walk may be a SMARTIE goal, or some other aspect of motor development. Could be fine motor, using the small muscles in your hands to pick things up, or gross motor, some kind of large muscle activity like walking or running or jumping. The second to last picture shows a man and a child in a swing, and the man is giving his child a kiss as he pushes the swing, and this is intended to emphasize positive relationships between adults and children, whether it's educators, providers, family members, parents, and their children. And that for some families or providers or educators, that involves some sort of behavior support, which clients and families put into their own words. And the final picture is of a lunchbox. It looks like a healthy lunch. So healthy food and access to food may also be topics of goals in CIS. I hope some of these topics match with the ones that you thought of, and you may have many more.
So here we have a timeline that shows us at the beginning of the development of a one plan that a plan must be written that includes at least one SMARTIE goal or outcome with clients and families. And then down the timeline, we see that at least every 6 months or as needed, the one plan must be reviewed and SMARTIE goals should be rewritten or revised. So we know that goals are not set in stone. Goals may be short-term or long-term. They might be shorter than this 6-month timeline that you see here. An example of a short-term goal may be that a CIS Strong Families Vermont responsive home visitor might develop a goal with a parent, and they might choose 2 strategies to stay calm when feeling upset with their child. A long-term goal might be moving beyond self-regulation to the interaction and choosing 1 or more positive parenting strategies when interacting with their child. Another example of a short-term goal might be working with a parent and a baby to latch, and a long-term goal might be weight gain.
Here we have a draft image, an image that may give an idea of the integration within CIS. So if you think of CIS as a flower with the family or client at the center, you see how the petals of the flower, the colors are, they don't stay in their own section of the flower. And the Venn diagram to the right of the flower shows that there are 4 core sets of services in CIS: early intervention, specialized childcare, Strong Families Vermont home visiting, and early childhood and family mental health. Each set of service is its own expertise, and the services overlap or are integrated so that when families and clients are working with providers from those sets of services, they don't feel like the provider is working only on one aspect of their lives, but it's a holistic approach. And this means that goals, the way this looks in CIS is that goals might be shared across providers and sets of services and the client and family. So thinking about a goal that has to do with smooth transition during drop-off at childcare or an early childhood education program in the morning, you might have 2 different sets of expertise supporting the family around that goal. So one might be early intervention. Let's say the child is a 2.5-year-old, and drop-offs have been difficult in part because of a need for support around communication. And the child may use an augmentative or alternative communication system. In this case, it might be a simple picture system, picture board. And the speech-language pathologist on the CIS team may support the caregiver and the child around using the picture board to review the schedule, and that helps guide them through the routine so everybody knows what's been done and what to expect. So, maybe they open the door, there's a picture of putting their belongings away. They may then put their photograph somewhere, whatever the routine is in the setting, and then join an activity. And by moving through that sequence, it may help the child and the caregiver with their communication and ease the transition. There may be another approach to the same goal of smooth transitions at drop-off, in which an early childhood and family mental health clinician supports the child and caregiver. So in that situation, the mental health clinician may be addressing how difficult it is for the child to leave their parent. And we won't speculate about why that is, but it is a big challenge. And so the early childhood and family mental health clinician is supporting them in establishing some rituals. Maybe there's a high five and then a hug, and then something that the caregiver says to the child before the caregiver actually leaves, so the child knows exactly when that's coming, and they've done something positive right before. So that's one example of how it might look. Another example of a shared goal is if a family has been working with a Strong Families Vermont home visitor, and they've been addressing perhaps some parenting skills, some relationship, strengthening the relationship between the parent and the child, or the parents and the child. And let's say there's a change in the family's life and there's a need to find and access and engage with a quality early childhood education program. The family support home visitor may ask the family if they'd be interested in adding another team member, and perhaps that might be a specialized child care coordinator. And so there might be a goal around attending a quality early childhood education program, and the family support home visitor may be working on issues of comfort with the program and adding caregivers to the family circle, having their child be cared for by other people. And the specialized child care coordinator might be working around identifying quality child care programs that are accessible to the family. And so they may be working together in a variety of ways. It may not be separate visits or something. There might be some consultation or sharing of information over the phone together, but the goal itself could be shared. CIS has a form, the outcomes page in the CIS 1 plan, that gives a structure for writing SMARTIE goals. It has 4 quadrants. The first one says, we want. The second one says, so that. The third one says, how will we know we're successful? And the fourth one says, resources. So during this part of the presentation, I'll be talking about those 4 quadrants on the outcomes page in the CIS 1 plan. We know that some providers in sets of services within CIS are not using that exact form. They may be using an electronic health record. They may have their own forms. And what makes it an equivalent is if those 4 elements or quadrants are in that alternative or equivalent form or system. So it can be tricky. We ask providers to do the best they can to fit the 4 quadrants into their own system. I wanted to talk through the 4 quadrants just a little bit. The first one, we want, has a accompanying question, what would you like to happen? This can be a little tricky sometimes because it might not be straightforward. Not every family or client is ready to articulate something that is achievable and specific. So there may need to be some preparation for getting to this point of generating a SMARTIE goal, where there's conversation about hopes and dreams, what the family really wishes was happening, or what they would like to see happen over the child's lifetime. Or a pregnant person may be talking about how they'd like their delivery to go. Or an early childhood educator might express their vision of the transition and routines in their setting, whether it's classroom or outdoor-based program. And also what's very helpful is to have discussion of the client or family's routines. So talking about what are the parts of the day that are most challenging and what are the parts that go the most smoothly. And in this way, you can identify some specific goals because they're tied to routines. And one thing we wanted to emphasize is that the we want section doesn't have to be a quote from the family or or client. We'd like it to express family voice. So that doesn't mean it has to say exactly what the client says, but should have the intent or the spirit of what the client is saying without using, or family, without using any professional jargon. There also may need to be conversation about, if the goal is around a child, around what children that child's age typically do, or what given what the child's doing now, what might be coming up. We're looking, I think Julia already discussed how we're looking for goals that have a 6-month to a year timeline. So let's move to the next quadrant. So that this is really looking at the family and child's everyday life or client. So tying it into the difference that achieving this goal will make. Our goals in CIS aren't around skills that researchers or people outside of the context in which the client and family live are interested in, but they're really about what makes a difference in the client and family's life. So it might be so that the child learns how to gain skills interacting with peers, because we know that's going to happen across their lifetime. Or so that the children in a classroom are able to maximize their learning. The third quadrant has to do with what is the criteria that will let more than one person know that success has been achieved, that the goal has been met. And so this is a little bit of a trick to think, would 2 people agree that the criteria had been met, or really could only one person tell? And this is the area in the outcomes development or page where we see most of the elements of the SMARTIE acronym. They may be in other quadrants or in other parts of the plan. And often we're going to see here, what is the specific thing that's going to happen, when is it going to happen, and the elements there. You may generate with your clients or families some unique way of measuring goals in order to know that they're successful. For instance, it might be marking something on a calendar, or it might be showing pictures on a cell phone, or it might be having a CIS professional join the family at playgroup in order to observe what the child is doing there. So things could look a lot of different ways other than, a formal assessment. And finally, what resources do we have to help with this outcome? That has to do with both formal and informal support. So resources could be neighbors, family members, could be parts of the community like a nearby park or a busy street where everybody's practicing getting across safely. It could be a more formal support, such as the CIS providers on the team or other people that have more of a professional relationship in the client or family's life. It really is whatever the client and family say is helpful to them in achieving the goal. For CIS early intervention, the so that quadrant, the why is this important, may align nicely with the child outcomes. So that is a resource that CIS providers have in developing goals. It wouldn't say the outcome exactly, but how that child outcome relates to the priorities of the child and family.
This summer celebrates my 10th in Vermont, And when I moved here, I already knew it was filled with amazing people who advocated for policies and implementing practices that supported environmental justice, social justice, and disability rights, and that Vermont was very often at the forefront of leading policy and change for good. Since that time, I have developed a very healthy understanding and appreciation for the trailblazing spirit of Vermonters and delicious maple creamies, of course, because it feels like we're often the first to do something wildly innovative. Using SMARTIE Goals within CIS keeps with that spirit. Before we dive into discussing SMARTIE Goals and breaking down the acronym to support goal writing, I find it helpful to be thinking about a shared example together. As a wise and wonderful EI service coordinator shared with me when developing goals for my 18-month-old and our family, she said, "The best goals come from families' own words or thoughts or intentions." So let's start there. I want you to imagine a family member who, when asked, "What would you like to happen?" they say, "I really want to sit down and eat a meal as a family so that we can enjoy time together." Now there might be more there, and depending on your specialty and service, you may be listening to a family's concerns, priorities, and resources and hopes with various lenses and from a particular point of view. But we can imagine many scenarios from this example that could include a family member describing their child as a picky eater, a child experiencing difficulty sitting upright for longer periods of time due to low muscle tone. The family may include a pregnant person who was just diagnosed with gestational diabetes. The family may have unreliable transportation. The family may be experiencing food insecurity, along with feelings of stress and frustration related to not yet reaching their hopes of having a shared meal together where they can enjoy each other's company. Setting the context reminds us that writing SMARTIE Goals does not occur in isolation. It's through conversation that each of you are actively listening to the client's hopes and dreams, along with their priorities, concerns, resources, and supports and needs, to begin the rather challenging work of thinking through and documenting a SMARTIE goal within the outcome section of the one plan or the equivalent. With that context set, let's dive into and break down the acronym for SMARTIE. As Julia shared earlier, the SMART part of SMARTIE has been around for nearly 40 years. In comparison, the newest addition to the acronym has been credited to being developed in 2021. Now we're going to explore each element of the SMARTIE acronym together, describing the goal and what it looks like when it's accomplished, including the criteria, begins with being specific. So what does it mean to be specific? It means to state specifically the intended accomplishment to reach a client's hopes and dreams. Being specific makes the goal focused and concrete. The goal becomes clear and understandable. It means to keeping it free from jargon and any specific disciplines or services. It also means avoiding words that are not specific. Non-specific word examples include passive terms such as improve, decrease, increase, maintains, tolerates, among others. One approach to aid in specific goals is to use the third word rule, identified by Rush and Sheldon. The third word rule refers to the third word in the outcome or goal statement, and that third word of the outcome statement should be contextualized, a contextualized action that is functional. Let's take a moment to discuss what we mean by contextualized and functional, since those words will come up later. By contextualized, we mean the environment that impacts the client. By functional, we mean something that is meaningful and useful in the client's everyday life. For example, Taya will eat with her family at mealtime, eating the foods they eat. The word eat in this example of Taya used in the slide meets the criterion of the third word rule. Another example of an outcome statement with a functional third word is Taya will sit with her family at mealtime. Both eat and sit may be more contextualized, that is, more concrete and clear than the word join, for example. Join could mean many things. What does it mean to join in a family meal? One of the best things about finding the just right word to be specific and contextualized in an action word is that it will assist you in writing a goal that is measurable, and we will discuss that next. We include a measurement focus within the goal so that we are able to evaluate progress towards the goal. It answers the question, how will we know success? With that in mind, we can ask ourselves, what data can we collect that reveals progress and success? Keeping in mind that smaller short-term goals, strategies, or objectives may assist in breaking down a long-term goal and making it easier to document and measure progress. These steps were adapted from a 7-step process developed by Robin McWilliam that, among many things, includes steps for making a goal measurable. These are steps 5 through 7, which we will go over together. So when you're looking at the slide, we're going to read from left to right. The first column is the steps, and the second column is the outcomes associated with each step. So starting in the upper left-hand corner, we have step 5. It asks you to add a criterion for demonstration of the contextualized functional action that begins the goal. In our example, it is, how will we know that Taya has acquired the skill of eating with her family at a mealtime and eating the foods they eat? We can add the following criterion. We will know Taya can do this when she eats at least 2 of the foods that the rest of the family eats. Step 6 asks you to add another criterion for generalization, maintenance or fluency, if appropriate, across routines, people, materials, and places. We can do this by adding to the statement during each mealtime. Lastly, step 7 asks you to identify over what amount of time. So how frequently does Taya need to demonstrate her skill of eating with her family and trying at least 2 of the foods that the rest of the family eats? Based on prior conversations, Taya's service provider decided that 1 week was reasonable. Part of measurement is working with your client or family and discussing how can we document data. How can families and providers show evidence? Families can rate things. They can show information from their cell phone, they can mark their calendars, and providers can mark observations in their progress notes. There's many ways that data can be collected. What's important is discussing that with your client or family about what methods work best for them. So here's the goal so far. Taya will eat with her family at mealtime by eating the foods they eat. We will know she can do this when she eats at least 2 of the foods the rest of the family eats during each mealtime for 1 week. That brings us to A, Achievable. As a goal is being written, it's important to keep this letter A, Achievable, in mind. The aspiration is to make a goal that is challenging, that is ambitious, and simultaneously reasonable and achievable. Is 2 foods eaten that are the same between Taya and her family reasonable? Is it realistic that Taya could do this behavior or skill for an entire week across all family meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner? You can imagine how this goal could be shrunk to make it more realistic if that was necessary. For example, changing each mealtime to at least 1 mealtime. Or decrease from eating at least 2 of the same foods to be just 1 of the same foods. As a goal is being written, it is important to keep the letter R, relevant, or routines-based in mind. With this, we want to ensure that the goal is meaningful and functional to the client, family, and child. The beauty of functional goals is that they support healthy development and the well-being of a client, family, or child in everyday activities. Now we can examine the goal against the criterion that the goal is relevant and functional. Since eating and meal times are extremely functional, this goal does meet the criterion. When writing or examining a written goal, it is important to keep the idea of functionality in mind when considering to what extent the written goal is relevant and routines-based. That is, identifying specific behavior and/or knowledge that supports child, family, and client's participation in their family, school, community, life. A goal that is functional will enhance the client's capacity and their participation in everyday activities or routines. It is meaningful and important. It is convenient and useful. It's a part of their everyday life, and based on personal interests, hopes, dreams, and priorities. Finally, to include the last of the old SMART acronym, T stands for time-bound. This means that the goal includes a clear end date and that it has been decided based on a reasonable yet ambitious timeline. As you can see in the example on the slide, the goal has been improved by adding in the clear end date of 6 months. Now let's take a look at the newest editions of SMART goals, that is the letters I and E. So what is SMARTIE? SMARTIE was developed by the Management Center, an organization that, and this is taken from their mission and history section of their website, it helps social justice leaders build and run equitable, sustainable, and results-driven organizations. They had the idea to improve upon the concept of SMART by adding an I, standing for inclusive, and an E, standing for equitable. To the best of my knowledge, no other state is using the concept of SMARTIE within their systems similar to Vermont's CIS system. That again makes Vermont a trailblazer in this area, and as such, it will be collectively understood and further defined as we put it into action in our state, our systems, and our circles of influence. Let's take a closer look at the ideas making goals SMART, measurable, achievable, relevant, routines-based, time-bound, and inclusive and equitable. Together, we're making sense of what these new concepts mean and how they apply to our work. The Racial Equity Tools Glossary defines inclusion as authentically bringing traditionally excluded individuals and/or groups into processes, activities, and decision policy making in a way that shares power. What does inclusive mean when it comes to writing goals? One way is to think of sharing power and voice by creating goals that reflect and honor the client or family's culture, customs, rituals, and routines. To fully bring individuals who might traditionally be excluded into the goal writing process, we want to write goals that are jargon-free, positive, and strengths-based. Inclusion is about who has the power to make decisions, or the power to participate in a meaningful way. With that in mind, inclusive may also mean reflecting on some key questions. In particular, when it comes to writing the actionable part of the goal. So that is the strategies and actions part of the outcomes page. So first, where might power and differences impact the strategies and actions identified for this goal? Second, in what ways can we share power and help develop somebody's power from within so that they have the agency to feel their own power when it comes to achieving this goal? Third, in what ways can we engage with one another so that everyone involved feels a sense of belonging within the process? That brings us to E, equitable. The racial equity tools Glossary defines equitable as to treat everyone fairly. An equity emphasis seeks to render justice by deeply considering structural factors that benefit some social groups, communities, and harms other social groups or communities. Sometimes, justice demands, for the purpose of equity, an unequal response. So, what does equitable mean when it comes to writing goals? To ensure when developing outcomes with clients and families, and to keep in mind the issues of fairness, justice, or systemic inequities that could contribute to challenges for or achieving identified goals, there are several reflection questions that we can take into consideration. First, how can we understand the histories of marginalized communities so that the strategies and activities planned to achieve this goal also address systemic injustices, inequities, or oppression?
We're going to share with you 2 example outcomes. For the first one, we'll talk about all 4 quadrants in the outcomes page of the CIS 1 plan, or the elements we'd like to see in an equivalent outcome. So for that one, we're talking about a child named Charitas, a mother named Amina, a CIS Strong Families Vermont Family Support home visitor named Kaya. And the way the 4 quadrants read is, we want Charitas to have an opportunity to play with other children her age so that Charitas will learn to use her words with children as well as adults. The outcome is Amina will take Charitas to playgroup twice a month for 2 months, and the resources to help with the outcome are Kaya, the CIS Strong Families Vermont home visitor, Laura, the playgroup facilitator, and Amina's calendar for marking when they go to playgroup. Our question for you is, how is this outcome, specifically Amina will take Charitas to playgroup twice a month for 2 months, how is it SMARTIE? What's SMARTIE about it? So maybe pause the webinar for a minute and think through that. You might want to write out the acronym and list how this outcome, Amina will take Charitas to playgroup twice a month for 2 months, fits the criteria. And when you've done that, you can compare what you thought of to these ideas. It's specific, and it says it uses the 3rd word rule. It's kind of stretched a little bit over a number of words, but it says take Charitas to playgroup. So that's the specific action we would like to see. It's measurable in that it says we can tell if Amina did that or not by looking at her calendar and seeing that she marked 2 times. Perhaps this is a system that Amina suggested, or that Amina and the home visitor, Kaya, developed together and they've used for other things, so they know it will work. It's achievable. Amina has been to playgroup before with Charitas, and so we know that she can get there. And she has said, Amina has said that she thinks this is something that they developed together, and so it isn't something that someone else came up with in isolation, but Amina was a partner in. It's relevant because Amina has prioritized Charitas learning, having time with other children and learning how to interact with them. And we know that's a skill that Charitas will need throughout her life. And it's time bound. This is something maybe to think about because it says twice a month for 2 months. So it gives some time parameters. However, it doesn't really say when, like next year or over what time period. It's not time bound in that way. So maybe if you were developing this, you might add an end date, or by a certain period this will happen. And inclusive and equitable, I think some things to consider there are, okay, Amina's been to playgroup with Charitas, but can they get there twice a month for 2 months? Or does that cost money? When Amina does that with Charitas, what will their experience be at playgroup? Will they be welcomed and included and want to go back again? Those are some of the considerations, and also perhaps the quality of the playgroup in, we know there is one, but in Amina and Charitas's community. And so that covers the SMARTIE acronym. Let's look at another example. In this second example, we won't go through all the quadrants. We'll focus on the quadrant called the outcome, or how will we know when we're successful. And that quadrant reads, Naomi will report that she feels very informed about how children grow and learn during their first 6 months, and she'll do that after 3 home visits. So again, please think for a minute about the SMARTIE acronym and whether or not this outcome meets the criteria. You may have some ways that it does and some ways that it doesn't. If we consider the S in SMARTIE, it follows the third word rule that Naomi will report. So we know what the specific thing is that we're going to measure, and that is that she reports feeling informed. informed. So we also know something about measurable. Perhaps Naomi and her CIS, the CIS provider who's supporting Naomi, have come up with a system. Perhaps it's even a homemade rating scale that goes from not at all informed to very informed. So she'll report she feels very informed about how children grow and learn. And it's limited to a specific time period during their first 6 months, so child development during that period. It's achievable, again, like the previous example, because they developed it in partnership, and both the provider and the client feel like this is something that they can achieve within 3 home visits. It's relevant because this is one of the primary areas of concern Naomi expressed when talking to the home visitor about her pregnancy and delivery. She is worried about what to expect after the baby is born and how she will care for the baby during that time. And so giving her some information when asked what would help her, she's described, well, what happens, what should I expect? So laying out for her some early milestones in child development, whether it's by sharing videos or sharing printed materials, bringing another person on the home visit, a trusted person who maybe can share that information verbally. There are a variety of ways that could happen. It's time bound because it says during their first 6 months after 3 home visits. Again, it doesn't really give an end time, so that might be a question to ask when you're developing your own SMARTIE goals. And inclusive and equitable, some questions you might ask are whether or not the material presented to give the information is in Naomi's first language, is accessible to her in terms fits in her time frame that she has for reviewing it. Things like that might be things to consider. And also, child development has quite a range to it, and there are some things that we consider milestones, that we may consider to be milestones, that might be culture specific. And so taking into account maybe when describing being able to pick up a toy or an object and hold it, grasping something and holding on to it, the examples that are used might be toys or objects that Naomi might use with her child.
We conclude our training today with an invitation. We invite you to find a way to discuss SMARTIE goals that you develop with families and clients. Perhaps there's a way to add discussion time to your regular team meeting agenda, like your CIS intake team. Thanks for listening to our webinar today. If you want to contact us, information is included with this recording.